it's interest to you, and it certainly is of interest internally.
The millions of dollars spent on overtime by area localities goes under the microscope.
Live in high definition from the area's most experienced news team, this is NBC 29 HD News at 6.
The amount of money shelled out in overtime costs is stacking up in cities and counties across the NBC 29 viewing area.
Charlottesville City Hall is spending millions of dollars each year to keep up with growing community demands. But the flow of cash is catching the attention of those in power, and those overtime policies could look a lot different next year. NBC 29's Henry Graff is live in Charlottesville tonight with our top story details. Hi, Henry.
Casey, good evening. You know, those overtime policies widely vary depending on which locality you look at in the NBC 29 viewing area. But one thing we did notice with all these localities all across the board, those overtime costs have steadily increased over the past 5 years. A Freedom of Information Act request is shedding light on how much your local government is paying its employees in overtime costs.
You can't always predict some things that are going to happen in the community, and so you have to be able to be as responsive as possible.
NBC 29 pulled overtime figures for the past 5 years from across the area. Charlottesville spent the most, coming in at more than $17 million. Albemarle County's costs stand at about $13 million. Augusta County rounds out the top three at $2.7 million. Do you think $17 million for the city of Charlottesville is a lot of money over 5 years?
When you say the word $17 million, yes, that seems like a lot. At the same time, I don't know the ins and outs to understand what money that might have prevented us spending in full-time roles.
Police, fire, and animal control departments are the largest driver of overtime costs for most localities. Charlottesville City Councilor Heather Hill says sometimes paying overtime is cheaper than hiring a new employee with a yearly salary and benefits. But Hill says OT should not be the new norm.
If you see that short-term need is coming up again and again and again, then you have to consider it long-term. Is this really actually a need that we need to be fulfilling through a more permanent role?
New leadership will consider policy changes. Charlottesville City Manager is working to restructure the organization and its staff, and a new human resources director is coming on board.
So I think that those policies and how we treat overtime is something that's certainly of interest right now.
Back out here live, Hill also says expect for council to put those overtime costs under the microscope as they begin budget work here at the end of the year. It is also important to point out here in Greene County, from those numbers that we pulled, Greene County does not allow overtime for its government employees. So those numbers for Greene County alone, just law enforcement at this point in time, Casey.
All right, Henry Graff live in Charlottesville for us tonight. Thank you, Henry.
This is NBC 29 HD News at 6.
Not always the best calls, because we do handle things like animal cruelty and animal abuse.
But first tonight, NBC 29 takes an up-close look at the increasing number of animal control calls and their increasing cost across Central Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley. More and more people interacting with more and more animals means officers are spending more time dealing with nuisance complaints.
And more calls are also adding up to higher costs for taxpayers. NBC 29's Henry Graff has our details live tonight in Charlottesville. Good evening, Henry.
Steve Case, good evening. We received call and budget information for animal control from 5 localities, including Albemarle County. And basically across the board, we saw increases everywhere. But the officers out there on the street say this is an essential service for that encounter between man and beast. A feral dog, a bull on the loose, and bark complaints, all in a day's work for Albemarle County Police Officer Mason Walsh.
Just calling to get a little more information about the incident that occurred earlier.
Walsh is just one of the officers serving the county's Animal Protection Unit.
We get a little bit of everything here at Albemarle County. We have, pretty rural areas. We have almost city-like areas as well. Just being able to adapt to every type of call.
And those animal control calls are on the increase across the area. Over the past 5 years, Albemarle officers have fielded more than 14,000 calls. During that same time, costs have increased from more than $154,000 a year to $191,000.
I think some of our calls are up and some of our calls are down compared to our regular calls. It seems like we've had less animal bites in the recent past, which is fantastic.
To compare, NBC 29 pulled stats from across the viewing area. Augusta County received almost 14,000 calls from 2014 through present. Costs went from $387,000 per year to $445,000. Madison County's animal control answered more than 10,000 calls, ballooning from $111,000 per year to operate to $271,000.
There's enough of a need for an animal protection unit that it's really good for the community to have someone who specializes in animals who's capable of handling calls like that.
Back out here live, Albemarle County is also taking a different approach to how it is now hiring new animal control officers. The police department is cross-training those new animal control officers to also be able to help out on the patrol side of things.
Henry Graff live for us in downtown Charlottesville tonight. Henry, thank you.
Tonight, city halls and county administration offices all across Central Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley are stepping up their efforts to battle cybersecurity threats.
These organizations are being attacked on the regular, and they are paying up to stay one step ahead of hackers as those attacks evolve. NBC 29's Henry Graff has been digging into the numbers and the threats.
Yeah, the deputy county administrator out in Augusta County tells me they have been hit millions of times in a short window. Other localities say they are thwarting attempts daily. It's all adding up now as hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars are now consumed by cybersecurity. Trying to infiltrate cyber networks and steal sensitive information from your local county office building or city hall.
Where a lot of the threat for the municipalities comes from is actually organized crime that's overseas.
That growing threat now requires an equally growing response. NBC 29 got rare access to some of these closely monitored facilities, servers and cables in locked rooms, all with private data ripe for the picking from a hacker who can penetrate the firewall.
The real importance is that we don't want any attacks or anything that would enable our network to shut down.
Augusta County reported 60 million hits over some 150 days, including from places like North Korea and Vietnam. The city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County say their systems are targeted thousands of times each day. Some are phishing scams, others more dangerous. Not all are harmful, but each one is taken seriously.
There are varying different attempts for our network. It could be a security company scanning items, or it could actually be, something more hardcore.
The costs of preventing a cyber intrusion continue to get higher. NBC 29 obtained those totals for the last 5 years. Charlottesville spent about $450,000, Augusta about $355,000, Albemarle more than $231,000, Fluvanna spends about $34,000 per year, and since 2017, Madison County spent around $4,700 each year.
And that's been a growing budget number for us in the last few years, and it will continue to grow.
But you can't just throw money at the problem. Places like Albemarle and Augusta now require yearly cybersecurity training for all employees, all to provide a better line of defense.
What to look for, how to know if an email is real or not, to help them be really proactive in our collective stance to prevent cyber threats.
These localities understand they hold the keys to sensitive information about you, and no one wants that information getting into a hacker's hands.
All the services that you're used to from the government, if their network is shut down, they cannot deliver those services.
All the organizations we pulled information from have a range of software packages and systems in place. Some are very sophisticated, others have fewer bells and whistles. But even those basic phishing email scams have really evolved right now for these localities to deal with, which is why those localities are now doing that regular training so they make sure the employees aren't the ones actually opening up the doors to these hackers at this point in time.
You think about the concerns we as individuals might have and then multiply that by what these folks have to deal with.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to, they might be trying to get private information, but also trying to do ransomware where they hold the systems hostage. Sure. At that point in time, which we've seen in other states in the country where, an entire locality is crippled from doing basic things like dealing with the treasurer's office.
Sure.
It's a whole new world out there.
It is indeed.
Yeah,
Thanks, Henry.
Non-profits vie for a limited pool of funds to keep the doors open and the services flowing.
Tonight we look at the amount of money local governments spend on those organizations. NBC 29's Henry Graff joins us live from Charlottesville with the details. Good evening, Henry.
Steve, Sharon, good evening. In terms of nonprofit organizations in our area, the experts tell me we kind of fall in the middle of the pack. Not too many for an area our size, but also not too few. And a lot of them rely on those taxpayer dollars to keep going. The area has its fair share of them.
It is a robust nonprofit sector.
And each of those good deed doing nonprofits needs cold hard cash.
Where are the needs and which organizations do we feel like are in the best position to make the biggest impact?
That question lies in the hands of city councils and board of supervisors across Central Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley.
It certainly gets emotional, but there are limits to how much we are able to do.
NBC 29 dug into the nonprofit funding from across the region. Albemarle County spends, on average, $1.5 million each year. Madison County hovers either side of $500,000, and Augusta County averages about $183,000 per year.
We're aware that the need is complex and also pretty intense for our families.
The city of Charlottesville is reworking how nonprofits get money from its coffers. City Councilor Heather Hill says the change should level the playing field between established nonprofits and startups.
Is there a more prescriptive approach we could be taking to have a greater impact, quite frankly, on the community?
For the upcoming fiscal year, the city received 72 applications asking for $3.4 million total. Last year, the combined ask stood at $2.4 million, but council could only fund $1.8 million.
It's very challenging, and I'll tell you that work session the first year I was involved in the budget, where you have people who are impacted by these organizations in a very positive way. And
the Center for Nonprofit Excellence in Charlottesville helps more than 300 nonprofits find that funding and get off the ground.
I would say that Charlottesville has a much more collaborative nonprofit sector where people want to help each other, to work together, even sometimes when you are going up for the same funds.
A friendly competition to get money from the right people.
There's a great need, and the needs are changing over time.
Back out here live, Albemarle County actually saw a surge, I'm told, in applications from nonprofits when the city froze its nonprofit application process for a year. And with the city changes, nonprofits now have to enter their application to two different entities instead of before when Albemarle and Charlottesville were working together and you had to go through one portal.